The United States has over 400 national parks, millions of acres of forests, mountains, and trails, and somewhere inside all of that, something is watching. Something that was here long before we were. I lived in rural Florida about 10 years ago when I was 17. Our house sat on roughly 1.6 acres of property bordered by dense woods that seemed to stretch endlessly behind our home. Back then, we lived on a narrow gravel road with just one streetlight positioned halfway up from our house. The isolation was both peaceful and unsettling, especially after sunset. Our neighborhood, if you could call it that, consisted of only 6 scattered houses. From our property, we could only see our immediate neighbors. About 500 feet up the road stood a small cabin where family friends lived as renters. The location perfectly captures that distinctly southern rural isolation, close enough to civilization to not feel completely cut off, but remote enough that help wasn't just a quick minute away. Growing up, I had always been fascinated by the paranormal. While other teenagers obsessed over sports or music, I spent countless hours researching unexplained phenomena and reading accounts of strange encounters. My mother's spiritual practices only intensified my curiosity. She practiced paganism and various forms of protective rituals. The good kind, she would always clarify whenever anyone asked. Her beliefs were rooted in protection and harmony with nature, though I never fully understood the extent of her practices until later. Our property had an unusual energy about it. The towering pines that surrounded our clearing seemed to hold secrets in their shadows, and the forest floor carpeted with fallen needles and dried leaves muffled sounds in a way that made the woods feel unnaturally quiet at times. During the day, these woods were my playground. By night, they transformed into something else entirely. That particular evening began like many others. It was early autumn, and the Florida heat had finally started to subside, giving way to pleasantly cool evenings. My parents, 2 older siblings, and several relatives had gathered at the cabin up the road for one of their regular get-togethers. The sounds of laughter and music drifted down to our house, muted by distance and the absorption of the surrounding trees. I stayed behind with my younger sister, who had fallen asleep on the couch while watching a movie. The living room was bathed in the flickering blue light of the television, casting strange, elongated shadows across the walls. The clock on the wall read just after 7:00 p.m., and darkness had fully descended outside our windows. While my sister slept, I felt restless. The house seemed too quiet, too confining. Maybe it was teenage boredom or perhaps some unconscious intuition, but something compelled me to step outside into the cool night air. I remember telling myself I was just letting our dog out to relieve himself, though in retrospect I think I was drawn outside by something I couldn't quite articulate. As I stood on our back porch, the familiar silhouettes of trees against the night sky should have been comforting. Instead, they seemed to shift and move in ways they shouldn't have. The darkness between them appeared deeper, more absolute than usual. Something felt off, though I couldn't place exactly what had changed. Little did I understand that night would permanently alter my perception of the woods I'd grown up exploring. What I encountered would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world and leave me questioning whether some things are better left uninvestigated. Standing on the edge of our property, I gazed into the darkness beyond our yard. The night was unusually still, no chirping crickets, no rustling leaves. Even the distant music from the cabin seemed to have momentarily paused, leaving behind a vacuum of sound that pressed against my eardrums. That's when I heard it movement in the woods near our bonfire clearing, about 100 feet from where I stood. The bonfire area was a spot our family used for gatherings, a circular clearing surrounded by tall pines where we'd set up chairs and roast marshmallows on weekend evenings. At first, I dismissed the sounds as wildlife. Growing up in rural Florida meant coexisting with various animals: raccoons, foxes, coyotes, and the occasional wildcat. But this sound was different. The footfalls were heavier, more deliberate than any local wildlife. Whatever moved through those woods had significant weight to it, pressing dried pine needles into the earth with each step. My instincts immediately signaled danger. The rational part of my brain tried to catalog possibilities: a large dog perhaps, or maybe a neighbor trespassing. But we were far from any walking path, and our neighbors rarely ventured into these woods, especially after dark. The movement continued, branches snapping under substantial weight. I backed toward the corner of our house, keeping my eyes fixed on the tree line. That's when I saw them, two pale, luminous discs floating about 6 feet above the ground at the forest's edge. They resembled eyes, but were too perfectly round, too intensely bright to belong to any animal I recognized. Those eyes, that's what they were, seemed to emit their own light rather than reflect it. They hung in the darkness like twin moons, unblinking and fixed directly on me. Despite the distance, I felt their gaze penetrating through me, studying me with cold intelligence. For several excruciating seconds, we remained locked in this standoff, me frozen in place, the entity motionless at the tree line. The boundary where our cleared property met the woods seemed to function as some invisible barrier. The thing, whatever it was, remained just beyond that threshold, as though physically unable to cross onto our land. Then it spoke. The sound that emerged from the darkness defied natural acoustics. It was simultaneously distant and right beside my ear, hollow yet resonant, like someone speaking through an old metal pipe. The voice was rough and strained, as though forcing sound through an anatomy not designed for human speech. "I see you," it said, the words unnaturally elongated. Hearing my name spoken by that voice triggered something primal inside me. Every cell in my body screamed to run, yet I remained paralyzed by fear, my muscles locked in place. "Come here," it continued, its tone shifting to something almost persuasive. "I don't want to hurt you." Its reassurance accomplished precisely the opposite of what it intended. The unnatural quality of its voice, that grating, metallic resonance, made each word feel like a physical threat. Though it remained at the tree line, I sensed its growing impatience, its desire to close the distance between us. "Here," it repeated, sharper this time, more command than invitation. The realization that this entity couldn't or wouldn't cross onto our property finally broke my paralysis. A rush of adrenaline flooded my system, briefly overwhelming my terror with youthful indignation. In that moment of misplaced courage, I committed what could have been a deadly mistake. I grabbed a rock from the ground, about half the size of my fist, and hurled it toward those glowing eyes. "Get out of here," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear despite my attempt at bravery. In the darkness, I couldn't see if my projectile found its mark. But the response was immediate, and terrifying. A piercing screech erupted from the tree line, a sound so unnaturally loud and high-pitched that it seemed to vibrate the air itself. Then, impossibly, the rock I had thrown moments before whizzed past my head, missing me by mere inches before disappearing into the woods behind our house. The force behind that return throw was nothing human. No person could have hurled that rock with such velocity, such precision in complete darkness. Whatever stood watching me from the tree line wasn't just trespassing, it was something I couldn't begin to comprehend. I ran for the front door, fumbling with the handle before practically falling inside. My sister had awakened, rubbing her eyes sleepily from her place on the couch. "What's wrong?" she mumbled, still half asleep. "Nothing," I managed, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "Just thought I heard something." I retreated to my bedroom, drew the curtains tight, and huddled under my blankets, listening intently for any sound that might indicate it had followed me to the house. My heart pounded so loudly in my ears that I struggled to hear anything else. All I could do was wait for my family to return, hoping the night would pass without further incident. The hours crept by with excruciating slowness, every creak of the house settling, every whisper of wind against the windows amplified my terror. I remained hidden beneath my covers, phone clutched in my sweating palm, debating whether to call my parents. Pride and embarrassment held me back. What would I say? That something with glowing eyes had spoken my name from the woods? That it had caught and returned my thrown rock with impossible force? Even as I experienced it, the encounter seemed too outlandish to be believed. Eventually, the sounds of vehicles on our gravel driveway announced my family's return. The relief that flooded through me was nearly overwhelming. I emerged from my room on unsteady legs to find my mother in the kitchen, putting away leftovers from the gathering. Without explanation, I wrapped my arms around her and held tight. "Thank you," I whispered, "for protecting the family." She pulled back, studying my face with concern. "What do you mean? What happened?" "I don't want to talk about it," I replied, summoning a small smile. "Just thank you." That night marked the beginning of my insomnia. Sleep refused to come as I lay staring at my ceiling, ears straining for any sound from outside. The rational part of my brain tried to explain away my experience. Maybe it was a hunter with a flashlight. Perhaps the returned rock was simply my imagination. But I knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever I'd encountered was neither natural nor easily explained. The next morning I ventured cautiously to the spot where I'd thrown the rock. Daylight transformed the woods into something mundane and familiar, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The bonfire clearing showed no obvious signs of disturbance, no footprints or evidence of what I'd seen. This absence of proof only deepened my unease. If there were no traces, how could I convince myself or anyone else of what had happened? Over the following days, I developed new habits. I refused to go outside after sunset. My bedroom windows remained locked and curtained regardless of the stifling Florida heat. I invented excuses to avoid family campfires and outdoor gatherings. My parents attributed my behavioral changes to typical teenage moodiness, but my mother watched me with knowing eyes, sensing something had fundamentally shifted. A week passed without incident, and I began to wonder if that night had been some vivid hallucination until the dreams began. Each night I found myself standing at the edge of our property, facing those same luminous eyes in the darkness. In these dreams, the invisible barrier didn't hold. The entity would step into the clearing, its form remaining frustratingly indistinct except for those eyes and a silhouette that seemed almost but not quite human. "You threw something at me," it would say in that same unnatural voice. "Now I'll throw something at you." I would always wake just as it raised its arm to throw, gasping and drenched in sweat, convinced I could smell pine needles and damp earth in my bedroom. My academic performance suffered as exhaustion took its toll. Dark circles appeared beneath my eyes, and my once healthy appetite disappeared. My mother finally confronted me one evening, sitting on the edge of my bed with an expression of such genuine concern that my carefully constructed defenses crumbled. "Something's out there," I whispered, the admission bringing both relief and renewed terror. "In the woods, it knows my name." Instead of dismissing my fears or offering platitudes, my mother's expression darkened with recognition. She took my hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "Tell me everything," she said. "Don't leave anything out." My mother listened without interruption as I described my encounter in detail: the unnatural movement, the glowing eyes, the impossible voice, and the returned rock. When I finished, she didn't question my sanity or offer rational explanations. Instead, she nodded slowly, her eyes focused on something distant. "The property has always been protected," she said finally. "My rituals ensure that." Her confirmation of supernatural protection should have been comforting, but it only raised more questions. If our land was protected, what exactly was being kept at bay, and why was it targeting me specifically? Mom rose and went to her closet, returning with a worn, leather-bound book I'd never seen before. The spine was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and fragile as she carefully opened it. "Our family has lived with these woods for generations," she explained. "What you encountered isn't new to this land." She turned the book toward me. On the page was a detailed hand-drawn illustration dated 1932, depicting a tall, gaunt figure standing among trees. Its eyes were rendered as empty circles, giving it an unsettling, hollow appearance. The accompanying text described the watcher in the woods that had stalked the property's borders for as long as anyone could remember. "Your great-grandmother first documented it," Mom continued. "Every few decades it becomes more active, testing boundaries, seeking ways to cross onto protected ground. According to family records, the entity never managed to claim anyone from our bloodline, though there were accounts of missing travelers and hunters who ventured too deep into the surrounding forest. The local indigenous people had apparently warned early settlers about the area, advising them to perform specific rituals before building homes. Those who heeded the warnings thrived. Those who dismissed them often abandoned their properties after experiencing phenomena similar to what I'd witnessed. "But why now?" I asked. "Why me?" My mother's expression grew troubled. "It's drawn to certain qualities: curiosity, emotional intensity, the threshold between childhood and adulthood. You're exactly the kind of person it finds interesting." She explained that my research into the paranormal might have inadvertently attuned me to forces most people remain blissfully unaware of. By seeking knowledge of the unknown, I had potentially made myself visible to it. "What exactly is it?" I pressed, needing to understand the threat I faced. My mother chose her words carefully. "The settlers called it many things: watcher, stalker, collector of souls. The indigenous people had their own name for it that roughly translates to the hungry one. But names have power, and it's dangerous to speak of such things too directly. She closed the book. What matters is understanding how to stay protected. You challenged it, drew its attention more fully to you. Now we need to strengthen our defenses. That night, my mother taught me the protective rituals that had been passed down through generations of our family. We burned specific herbs, spoke ancient words in languages I didn't recognize, and placed symbolic objects at crucial points around our property. The ritual felt simultaneously primitive and profound, connecting me to ancestors who had faced the same entity centuries before. As we worked, my mother revealed more family history stories of close calls, of relatives who had glimpsed the entity during particularly vulnerable moments in their lives. Some had heard it mimic loved ones' voices to lure them into the woods. Others had found strange arrangements of sticks and stones on the property boundaries, apparent attempts to disrupt the protective barriers. Remember, my mother cautioned, it can't enter our land uninvited. It can't cross the threshold unless welcomed. But it's patient and clever, and it will use your fears and weaknesses against you. As we completed the final elements of the ritual near the tree line, I felt the weight of countless generations who had performed these same actions to keep their families safe. For the first time since my encounter, I felt a measure of control returning, not enough to eliminate my fear, but sufficient to face another night with something resembling courage. "Will this stop the dreams?" I asked as we gathered our supplies. My mother's hesitation told me everything before she answered. "The dreams are its attempt to reach you through means that don't require physical crossing. Your mind remains your own territory to defend." That night, exhaustion finally overcame fear, and I fell into deep sleep. The entity visited my dreams as expected, but something had changed. The barrier between us remained intact, and I sensed frustration emanating from those glowing eyes as they watched me from the darkness. "Your mother can't protect you forever," it said, its voice somehow clearer in the dreamscape. "Eventually, you'll come to me." For the first time, I found my voice in the dream. "Never." The eyes narrowed, and I detected something new in its demeanor, respect perhaps, or reassessment. It hadn't expected resistance. Before the dream faded, I heard its final words. "We have time. I've waited for generations. I can wait for you." 2 weeks passed with relative calm. The dreams continued but lost their terrifying edge as I learned to recognize them as battlegrounds rather than helpless nightmares. During daylight hours, I could almost convince myself the entire experience had been exaggerated by an overactive imagination almost. Then came the gifts. The first appeared on our front porch one morning, a precisely arranged collection of small animal bones forming an intricate pattern. My father dismissed it as the work of local kids playing pranks, sweeping the bones away before I could examine them closely. But I recognized the deliberate placement, the unnatural symmetry that no child could have achieved. 3 days later, I found a dead fox placed at the exact spot where I had stood during my initial encounter. Its body was unmarked, showing no wounds or signs of predation, yet its eyes had been removed with surgical precision. The discovery sent me retching into the bushes while my older brother disposed of the carcass. "This isn't funny anymore," he told my parents that evening. "Someone's targeting our house." They called the sheriff, who dutifully took notes and promised to increase patrols on our road. But I knew law enforcement couldn't protect us from what lurked in those woods. The entity was escalating, growing more bold in its attempts to provoke a response specifically from me. The following weekend, my parents insisted I accompany them to a neighbor's gathering, hoping to break my self-imposed isolation. I reluctantly agreed, finding temporary comfort in daylight and the company of others. As afternoon faded into evening, however, my anxiety mounted. By sunset, I was visibly agitated, checking my watch and suggesting we leave before darkness fully descended. My mother recognized my distress and made excuses to our hosts. As we walked toward our car, I felt eyes on Minot, the supernatural gaze from the woods, but human observation. A neighbor's son, about 20 years old, approached me while my parents chatted with other adults. "You're the kid who's been seeing things in the woods, right?" he asked without preamble. My surprise must have shown on my face because he quickly added, "Word gets around. My grandfather used to talk about something similar when I was younger." Against my better judgment, I found myself asking, "What did he say about it?" The young man, whose name was apparently forbidden to mention, glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. "He called it the collector. Said it gathered things that interested it, sometimes objects, sometimes animals, sometimes people. A chill washed over me despite the warm evening air. My grandfather claimed he encountered it when he was about your age, he continued. Said it spoke to him, tried to convince him to walk into the woods at night. He refused, but his friend didn't. He paused, looking uncomfortable. They never found his friend. That's just a local legend, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He shrugged. Maybe, but grandfather never went into those woods again, not even during hunting season, and he made us promise the same. As we drove home in the gathering darkness, I couldn't shake the young man's words. The possibility that others had encountered the entity both validated my experience and deepened my dread. If the stories were true, this thing had been hunting in these woods for generations and sometimes successfully. That night I lay awake long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring at my ceiling and listening. Around 2 a.m., a soft tapping began at my window, gentle, rhythmic, almost polite. I knew without looking what would be there. The curtains remained closed, but in my mind's eye, I could see those luminous orbs floating outside the glass. The tapping continued for nearly an hour, occasionally interspersed with the sound of my name being called in that horribly familiar voice. Eventually it stopped, replaced by silence so absolute it seemed to have weight. I must have drifted off because I woke suddenly to find myself standing in our front yard, the cool grass beneath my bare feet. Moonlight illuminated the clearing enough to see that I was mere steps from the tree line. Ahead, just within the shadows of the forest, those pale eyes watched me. With horror, I realized I had sleepwalked dangerously close to crossing the boundary. The entity had nearly succeeded in luring me beyond protection while my conscious defenses were lowered. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on those glowing orbs until I reached our front door. Inside, I woke my mother in a panic, explaining what had happened. Her face paled as she realized the entity had found a new strategy. If it couldn't cross onto our property, it would try to draw me off it. We need to take more drastic measures, she decided, her voice tight with concern. This has gone beyond simple boundary protections. My mother spent the following day gathering supplies and consulting her books. That evening, she informed the family we would be performing a more powerful ritual specifically designed to reveal what we faced so we could defend against it more effectively. Knowledge is power, she explained as we gathered in the living room. If we can see it clearly, understand what draws it to us, we gain advantage. My father, always supportive of my mother's practices despite his own skepticism, helped arrange candles in a specific pattern. My siblings looked uneasy but participated without complaint. They had witnessed enough strange occurrences recently to take the threat seriously. As darkness fell, we began the ritual. My mother burned herbs that filled the house with sweet, earthy smoke. She spoke words in that same ancient language, her voice growing stronger with each phrase. The atmosphere in the room changed subtly, air felt thicker, charged with potential. Now, she instructed me, think about your encounters. Recall every detail, the sounds, the sensations, the exact words it spoke to you. I closed my eyes and concentrated, mentally revisiting each interaction with the entity. As the memories surfaced, the candle flame suddenly stretched upward, burning with unusual intensity. It's responding, my mother whispered. It feels our attention. A low humming vibration filled the room, making the windows rattle slightly in their frames. The temperature dropped noticeably, our breath becoming visible in the suddenly chilled air. What's happening? My father asked, his customary calm faltering. My mother's expression was one of fierce concentration. We're pulling back the veil, seeing through its disguise. The smoke from the herbs began swirling unnaturally, condensing into a vaguely humanoid shape in the center of our circle. Within this smoky silhouette, 2 points of light appeared, those same pale, luminous discs that had watched me from the woods. Why have you come to this family? My mother demanded, her voice commanding. The smoke figure wavered, and that now familiar voice emerged, but clearer, less strained than I had heard before. I have always been here, it replied. Long before your family, before any settlers. This land remembers me. What do you want with my child? My mother pressed. The smoke shifted, those glowing eyes turning directly toward me. Potential, curiosity, youth, things I have lost. A sudden realization hit me. This entity wasn't necessarily malevolent in the way I had imagined. It was ancient, alienating, frightening in its otherness, but its interest in me wasn't simply predatory. It was drawn to qualities I possessed that it recognized or perhaps coveted. "Are you human?" I found myself asking. "Were you ever human?" The smoke rippled, almost like laughter. "I was, long ago, before time was measured as you measure it." My mother tensed beside me. "A human who became something else," she murmured. "Through choice or circumstance?" "Choice," the voice confirmed. "Always choice, as your child will have choice." The implication chilled me more deeply than any supernatural encounter. This entity believed I could or would become like it someday. That my fascination with the unknown might lead me down a path similar to whatever transformation it had undergone. "I don't want what you're offering," I stated firmly. The smoke figure inclined what passed for its head. "Yet. You don't want it yet. But curiosity grows. Questions multiply. Ordinary existence dulls. I have watched your kind for centuries. I recognize the signs." My mother stepped forward, placing herself between me and the apparition. "You will not have my child, not through force, manipulation, or temptation. This family stands protected." The smoke began to dissipate, those glowing eyes dimming slightly. Before it fully vanished, the entity spoke one final time. "Protection doesn't last forever. Generations pass. Knowledge fades. I remain." With those words, the smoke scattered, the candles extinguished simultaneously, and the temperature gradually returned to normal. We sat in stunned silence for several moments before my father switched on the lights. "Did we banish it?" my younger sister asked hopefully. My mother's expression was somber. "No. We merely understood it better, and it understood us." That night, for the first time since my initial encounter, I slept without dreaming of glowing eyes or voices from the darkness. But this absence brought no comfort. I sensed the entity had simply changed tactics once again, settling in for a longer game than I had initially realized. The revelation that our unwelcome watcher had once been human transformed my fear into something more complex. Horror remained, certainly, but now accompanied by uncomfortable curiosity. What process could change a person into such an entity? How long had it existed in this in-between state, neither fully human nor supernatural? Most disturbingly, what had it recognized in me that suggested I might follow a similar path? These questions consumed my thoughts in the days following our ritual. I delved deeper into my mother's books, searching for historical accounts that might explain the entity's origins. Among her collection, I discovered a journal dating back to the early 1800s, written by a settler who had originally claimed our land. The journal detailed the writer's encounters with local indigenous people, who warned about the area's dangerous history. According to their oral traditions, a medicine man from centuries earlier had sought immortality through forbidden rituals. He achieved his goal, but at terrible cost, becoming untethered from humanity, unable to fully exist in either the physical or spiritual realm. Condemned to haunt the boundaries between worlds, he developed an obsession with those who showed similar spiritual inclinations. The account aligned disturbingly well with our experiences. The entity that watched our property wasn't some ancient evil or mythological creature. It had been a person who made catastrophic choices in pursuit of knowledge beyond natural limits. Armed with this information, I approached my mother. "It's targeting me because it thinks I'm like it was," I explained. "Because I research the supernatural, because I'm drawn to understanding things beyond normal experience." She nodded slowly. "That's what I feared. It recognizes something in your spirit, a kinship or potential for kinship." "How do I convince it it's wrong?" I asked. "How do I make it understand I don't want whatever transformation it underwent?" My mother considered this carefully. "You must confront it directly, not in dreams or through ritual, but at the boundary where it dwells. You must reject its offer explicitly, with absolute conviction." The thought of deliberately seeking another encounter terrified me, but I recognized the necessity. This entity wouldn't simply lose interest or find another target. It had fixated on me specifically, and only direct rejection might dissuade it. We planned the confrontation meticulously. My mother strengthened the protective boundaries around our property and prepared me with specific phrases and gestures that would reinforce my rejection. The confrontation would occur at dawn, a time of transition, when the entity might be more visible but less powerful than during full darkness. The appointed morning arrived clear and cool, I stood at the edge of our property as the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. My mother waited on the porch, close enough to intervene if necessary, but giving me space to face this challenge alone. As the forest gradually emerged from darkness, I sensed rather than saw the entity's approach. The air grew noticeably colder, and birds that had begun their morning song suddenly fell silent. Then, at the precise boundary between our cleared land and the woods, the familiar glowing eyes materialized. "I know what you were," I called out, my voice steadier than I expected. "I know what you want from me." The entity moved closer than it had ever ventured before, its form becoming slightly more distinct in the growing light, a tall, emaciated silhouette with disproportionately long limbs and those unnatural eyes. "Then you understand the opportunity," it replied, its voice less distorted than during our previous encounters. "Few are offered such knowledge." "I understand the cost," I countered. "I've read about what you sacrificed. That's not a path I'll ever choose." The entity went still, those luminous eyes narrowing slightly. "You cannot know what you might choose in time. Decades of ordinary existence, the slow decay of body and mind, the limitations of human perception. These burdens grow heavier with age." "They're not burdens," I insisted. "They're what make us human. Connection, change, even mortality, they give life meaning." "Meaning is subjective," it responded. "What meaning remains when everyone you know has returned to dust? When civilizations rise and fall before your eyes? I have witnessed more than you can imagine." "And you've experienced none of it," I said, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. "You watch but cannot participate. That's your punishment, eternal observation without connection." The entity's form wavered slightly, the first indication I'd struck a nerve. "I reject your interest in me," I continued, emboldened. "I reject any kinship between us. I choose humanity fully, completely, with all its limitations and endings." "You choose ignorance," it hissed, moving restlessly at the boundary. "I choose life," I corrected. "Real life, not your half-existence." The confrontation continued as the sun climbed higher, the entity becoming less distinct in the growing daylight. Its arguments grew more desperate, alternating between temptation and threats, but I remained resolute. With each rejection, its form seemed to diminish slightly, retreating incrementally toward the deeper shadows. Finally, as full morning light flooded the clearing, it spoke its parting words. "Time will test your conviction. I will be watching when doubt finds you." Then it was gone, leaving only a lingering coldness that gradually dissipated in the warming air. My mother joined me, placing a protective arm around my shoulders. "You did well," she said softly, "but remember its final warning. This isn't a single battle won, but the beginning of vigilance." I nodded, understanding the entity might never fully abandon its interest in me. The connection had been established. I would need to reaffirm my choice periodically throughout my life. 10 years have passed since that confrontation at the edge of our property. My life progressed along predictably human paths: college, career, relationships, all the ordinary triumphs and disappointments that constitute a normal existence. I moved away from that rural Florida house, establishing my own home in a different state, deliberately choosing a place with minimal forest coverage and abundant neighbors. Yet I never completely escaped the Watcher's influence. During particularly vulnerable moments, times of significant loss, periods of existential questioning, I sometimes glimpse those luminous eyes in darkened windows or feel that distinctive coldness brushing against my consciousness. These episodes are brief and increasingly rare, but they serve as reminders that some connections, once formed, never completely dissolve. My mother continues to maintain the protective boundaries around our family home, refreshing the ancient rituals each season. She once confided that previous generations experienced similar targeted interest from the entity, suggesting it cycles through our family line, seeking potential converts every few decades. "Your grandmother faced it in her youth," she told me during a recent visit, "and her grandmother before her, always drawn to the most spiritually sensitive among us." I've maintained a journal documenting my experiences, adding to the family record that stretches back centuries. Future generations should know what watches from the woods, should understand the temptations it offers and the true nature of its existence. Knowledge remains our strongest defense, the forbidden knowledge it promised, but practical understanding of the threat and its limitations. My research into the paranormal continues, though with greater caution and stronger boundaries. I no longer approach the subject with naive fascination but with respectful distance. Some mysteries are better appreciated from afar, some thresholds better left uncrossed. Occasionally, I wonder about the entity's origins, the human it once was, the choices that transformed it into its current state. In unguarded moments, I find myself speculating about its lonely existence, traversing the boundaries between worlds, watching life unfold but unable to participate. There exists a peculiar tragedy in its condition that occasionally evokes unwelcome sympathy. These moments of empathy concern me most, suggesting the entity correctly identified something in my nature that resembles its former self, a dangerous curiosity that could, under different circumstances, lead down similar paths. The recognition of this potential affinity serves as my most important safeguard, a constant reminder of what I might become if I pursued knowledge without ethical constraints. When I visit my childhood home, I no longer fear the forest that surrounds it. I respect its dangers but understand my power to reject what lurks within. The boundary between our property and those woods represents more than physical separation. It delineates a crucial philosophical choice between participation in human existence, with all its limitations, and the cold observation of immortality without connection. Sometimes, standing at that boundary during daylight hours, I speak aloud to the watcher I know still lingers among the trees. I describe the richness of human experience, the connections formed, the growth achieved, even the poignant beauty of transience. Whether these monologues reach their intended audience, I cannot say, but they reinforce my commitment to the path I've chosen. God alone knows what truly awaits beyond mortal existence. But I've concluded that rushing toward such knowledge through forbidden means creates something neither human nor divine, just the hollow observer my family has contended with for generations. The entity was right about one thing. Time tests conviction. Each passing year brings new questions, new awareness of mortality's approach. Yet these challenges strengthen rather than weaken my resolve. I choose the finite but fully experienced human journey over eternal shadow existence. Those glowing eyes may continue watching from forest edges and darkened corners throughout my life, but they observe someone firmly committed to remaining human with all the wonder, connection, and yes, eventual ending that entails. In this conscious choice renewed daily, I have found freedom from fear. The watcher remains, as it has for centuries, but now serves as a reminder rather than a threat, a stark illustration of what awaits those who seek to transcend humanity through isolation rather than connection, through observation without participation, through endless duration without genuine growth. And so our strange relationship continues, the watcher and the watched, each making fundamentally different choices about what constitutes a meaningful existence. In that philosophical gulf between us lies the essence of what it means to embrace our humanity, limitations and all. 5 years ago, when I was 28, my girlfriend Julia and I decided to challenge ourselves with the southern portion of Virginia's Appalachian Trail. At that point, we considered ourselves experienced hikers, having conquered several other segments of the famous path during our 3 years together. This particular stretch, approximately 166 miles winding through George Washington and Jefferson National Forests from Roanoke County to Pearisburg in Giles County, represented exactly what we were seeking: isolation, natural beauty, and the satisfaction of accomplishing something few casual hikers attempt. "It's probably the most remote section we'll ever do," Julia said, spreading the topographical maps across our dining room table. Her auburn hair fell across her face as she traced possible routes with her index finger. "That's the appeal, right? Getting away from everything?" I nodded, studying the contour lines that indicated steep climbs and descents. "That's why I love these trips with you, just us and the wilderness." Our apartment in Richmond felt increasingly constraining as autumn approached. Both of us worked demanding jobs, Julia as a hospital administrator and me as an environmental consultant. The stress accumulated gradually, like sediment in a stream, until we could feel it weighing on our relationship. These extended hiking excursions had become our remedy, our way of reconnecting with each other and disconnecting from everything else. "We should plan for 12 days, I suggested, calculating distances between resupply points. "That gives us some buffer if the terrain slows us down." Julia's green eyes sparkled with the excitement that always preceded our adventures. "Perfect. Mid-October would mean fewer people and spectacular foliage. What we didn't discuss, what we never really acknowledged, was the inherent danger of such isolation. We'd encountered our share of challenges on previous hikes: unexpected weather, minor injuries, equipment failures. These problems seemed manageable, even part of the experience. We prepared accordingly, with first aid supplies, emergency communication devices, and appropriate gear. I also carried protection, a 1911 handgun, and a Taurus Judge revolver. Julia sometimes teased me about this precaution, calling it my wilderness insurance policy, but never objected. When you're days away from civilization, the thin veneer of societal safety dissolves. Most hikers understand this truth without dwelling on it. The wild can be beautiful and terrifying simultaneously. As October approached, we assembled our gear methodically. Every item underwent scrutiny for weight and necessity. We dehydrated meals, packed layers for fluctuating temperatures, and tested our equipment repeatedly. The night before departure, we sat on our balcony with glasses of wine, watching the city lights flicker below. "What do you think we'll remember most about this trip?" Julia asked, leaning against my shoulder. "Probably something unexpected," I replied. "It's always what you don't plan for that stays with you." I had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. We arrived at the Virginia Creeper Trail Junction on October 12th, a Tuesday morning painted with autumn's most vibrant palette. The air carried that distinctive fall crispness, cool enough to energize without chilling. Sunlight filtered through red and gold leaves, creating dancing patterns on the forest floor. Perfect hiking conditions. After a final equipment check and a quick selfie to commemorate the start, we shouldered our packs and began our journey northward. The trail started gently enough, with moderate terrain that allowed us to find our rhythm. Julia walked ahead initially, her teal backpack swaying slightly with each step. "We should document all the different mushrooms we see," she called back, already stopping to photograph a cluster of orange fungi erupting from a fallen oak. Her enthusiasm for botanical details contrasted with my preference for sweeping vistas, a complementary difference that enhanced our travels. That first day passed pleasantly as we covered nearly 12 miles. Our muscles remembered the familiar burn of sustained hiking, and conversation flowed easily between periods of contemplative silence. We encountered only two other hikers, a retired couple from West Virginia who were completing their fourth section of the Appalachian Trail. "Nice stretch ahead," the husband advised as we parted ways, "but watch for the descent into Powell Valley. It gets slick when wet." By late afternoon, we established our first campsite near a small stream that provided both water and the soothing background music of rippling currents. The routine came back naturally, Julia filtering water while I secured the tent, then working together to prepare our campfire. After dinner, rehydrated beef stew that tasted better than it had any right to after a day of hiking, we sat shoulder to shoulder watching flames dance and collapse into glowing embers. "I already feel different," Julia said, her face illuminated by the firelight. "It's like everything back home exists in another dimension now." I understood exactly what she meant. The demands and deadlines that had seemed so urgent just days ago now felt trivial compared to the immediate concerns of shelter, food, and navigation. This mental shift was precisely why we subjected ourselves to the physical demands of these trips. That night, we slept soundly in our tent, the temperature dropping just enough to make our shared sleeping bag cozy rather than uncomfortable. The forest sounds, distant owls, rustling leaves, occasional cracking branches formed a familiar lullaby that eased us into deep, restful sleep. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. We averaged 11 miles daily, adjusting our pace to accommodate more challenging sections. The trail took us across babbling creeks, through dense hardwood forests, and occasionally to overlooks offering breathtaking panoramas of valleys consumed by autumn fire. We spotted deer, wild turkeys, and once from a respectful distance a black bear with 2 cubs foraging in a berry thicket. Our bodies adjusted to the routine, muscles adapting to the daily strain. Conversation between Julia and me grew increasingly philosophical as the mental noise of civilization faded. We discussed future plans, childhood memories, and the peculiar psychology of voluntary hardship. These were the conversations I treasured most, unforced, unhurried, and impossible to have amid the distractions of normal life. On our 4th night, camped at the edge of a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, the first hint of unease entered our journey. Nothing dramatic, just an inexplicable feeling that prickled at my subconscious. While gathering firewood, I repeatedly glanced over my shoulder, convinced I'd heard footsteps that didn't align with the natural forest rhythm. "Everything okay?" Julia asked when I returned to camp with arms full of branches. "Yeah," I responded, hesitating. "Just getting used to the deeper silence out here." I didn't mention my unease, attributing it to the increasing remoteness of our location. We were now fully committed to the trail, at least 2 days of hiking in any direction from the nearest access point. The awareness of our isolation lingered at the edges of my thoughts as we prepared for sleep that night. Before entering the tent, I checked that my handguns were easily accessible in my pack, a precaution that suddenly felt less excessive than it had days earlier. By the 5th day, we had settled completely into trail life. Our bodies moved with practiced efficiency, conserving energy on climbs, carefully placing feet on descents. We passed the halfway point of our journey, a milestone we celebrated with the luxury of chocolate bars we'd been saving for the occasion. That afternoon, however, the atmosphere began to shift, subtly. The weather remained perfect, clear skies, moderate temperatures, but something else changed. I first noticed it during our midday rest break at a moss-covered rock formation. "Do you feel like we're being observed?" I asked Julia as casually as possible, not wanting to alarm her. She looked up from her trail journal. "What do you mean?" "Probably nothing," I said, scanning the surrounding forest. "Just a weird feeling." But it persisted throughout the afternoon, that crawling sensation between my shoulder blades that signals unseen attention. Several times I stopped abruptly, turning to look behind us, expecting to catch someone or something watching from the trees. Each time revealed nothing but the empty trail and undisturbed forest. "You're jumpy today," Julia commented after my third sudden halt. "Sorry, just thought I heard something." As dusk approached, we located a suitable camping spot roughly 30 yards off the main trail. The area featured a small clearing bordered by thick rhododendron bushes on one side and mature oaks on the other. We prepared camp with practiced efficiency, though I found myself constantly surveying our surroundings. After dinner, sitting beside our small fire, Julia finally addressed my obvious discomfort. "What's been bothering you all day?" she asked directly. "And don't say nothing, I know you better than that." I hesitated, not wanting to infect her with my growing paranoia. I can't shake the feeling that we're not alone out here. "Like wildlife? Bears?" "No," I replied, struggling to articulate the sensation. "Like human presence, watching us." Julia frowned. "Have you seen anyone?" "No tracks, no sounds that couldn't be explained naturally. Just instinct, I guess." She reached for my hand. "Your instincts are usually good. Want to move camp?" I considered this option but shook my head. Darkness is setting in. Moving now would be more dangerous than staying put. That night, I slept fitfully, waking at every sound, real or imagined. Julia's steady breathing beside me provided some comfort, but I couldn't fully surrender to sleep. Each time I drifted off, some noise would jolt me back to alertness. A twig snapping, leaves rustling in patterns that seemed deliberate rather than wind-driven. Dawn brought relief and temporary dismissal of my concerns. In daylight, the forest appeared as it should, neutral territory, neither friendly nor hostile. We packed quickly and resumed our northward journey, pushing our pace slightly faster than previous days. Throughout that 6th day, the sensation of being monitored intensified rather than diminished. Twice I spotted movement in my peripheral vision that vanished when directly observed. Once, passing through a particularly dense section of trail, I clearly heard footsteps pacing ours from within the tree line, stopping when we stopped, resuming when we continued. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Julia. She nodded, face tightening with the first real concern I'd seen from her. Could be another hiker taking a parallel route? Without calling out or introducing themselves, I questioned. That's not typical trail etiquette. We continued walking, now both hyper-aware of our surroundings. The magical quality of the forest had transformed into something more sinister, each shadow, potentially concealing a watcher, each sound carrying ambiguous intent. When we stopped at a stream to refill our water bottles, I noticed something that confirmed my suspicions weren't merely imagination. On the muddy bank, partially obscured by fallen leaves, was a clear boot print. The impression was fresh, the edges still sharp rather than eroded by time or elements. Most tellingly, it pointed in the same direction we were traveling. I motioned Julia over silently and indicated the print. "Someone's following us," she whispered, voice tight with controlled fear. I nodded, and trying to stay hidden while doing so. "Rangers? Maybe checking on hikers?" "Rangers would identify themselves," I replied, "and they'd use the established trail, not parallel it from cover." The remainder of that day took on a surreal quality. We maintained our pace and outward calm, discussing options in hushed tones while scanning constantly for further evidence. By unspoken agreement, we decided to deviate from our planned route, hoping to determine whether the presence would adjust to follow us. It did. An hour after our deliberate detour, I spotted broken branches and disturbed underbrush about 50 yards off our new heading signs of someone moving hastily through dense forest to maintain their relative position to us. As daylight began fading, we faced a critical decision about where to camp. Standard wisdom suggested staying on or very near the trail, where other hikers might pass. But with no other hikers in sight for nearly 2 days, and the certainty that someone was deliberately tracking us, conventional safety rules seemed inadequate. "We should find somewhere defensible," I suggested to Julia, "somewhere they can't approach without us knowing." She agreed immediately, her earlier skepticism completely evaporated. We eventually located a small depression near a rocky outcropping that would prevent approach from behind. The position offered good visibility in 3 directions and solid rock at our backs. Not ideal for comfort, but significantly better for security. That night, I placed my guns within immediate reach and suggested we take alternating watch shifts. "You really think that's necessary?" Julia asked, though her tone indicated she already knew the answer. "I hope I'm overreacting," I replied honestly, "but yes, I do." I took the first watch while Julia tried to sleep. The forest at night transforms in ways non-hikers can never fully appreciate. Shadows gain substance, movements become meaningful, and the boundary between imagination and reality blurs. I sat with my back against the rock face, eyes constantly scanning the tree line, ears straining to differentiate normal forest sounds from potential threats. Approximately 2 hours into my vigil, shortly after midnight, I detected a pattern change. The typical nocturnal sounds, insects, occasional owl calls, rustling from small mammals, suddenly diminished. This abrupt hush represented the most alarming signal possible. Something larger was moving nearby, something that disturbed the forest's natural rhythm. I placed my hand on Julia's shoulder, applying gentle pressure to wake her without sound. Her eyes opened immediately, reading the tension in my posture. I placed my finger to my lips and pointed toward the northeastern edge of our clearing. For several minutes we sat motionless, barely breathing, scanning the darkness. The partial moon provided just enough illumination to differentiate shapes but not details. Then, unmistakably, a shadow separated from the tree line, a human figure moving with deliberate stealth along the perimeter of our camp. Julia's hand found mine and squeezed. I could feel her trembling slightly but admirably controlled. I reached for the Judge revolver with my free hand, keeping the movement minimal and slow. The figure stopped at the edge of our visible range, seemingly assessing our position. Their stillness suggested they hadn't noticed we were awake and watching. After what felt like an eternity but was likely only minutes, they retreated back into the forest shadow. Neither of us spoke until dawn began lightening the eastern sky. We remained vigilant through the remainder of the night, weapons ready, every sense heightened to painful acuity. The figure didn't return, but other sounds periodically emerged from the darkness, purposeful movement through underbrush, what might have been whispered conversation from multiple sources, once even the distinct sound of metal against metal. "We need to get out of here," Julia whispered as the first genuine sunlight reached our position. "Straight back to civilization, fastest route possible." I agreed without hesitation. We packed quickly, abandoning our planned itinerary entirely. Consulting our maps, I identified the shortest path to the nearest road access point, a 12-mile route requiring a demanding pace through challenging terrain. "If we push hard, we can make it by nightfall," I said, tracing the route with my finger. "No breaks except absolute necessities." "Let's go," Julia replied, already shouldering her pack. As we departed our campsite, I noticed something that hadn't been visible in darkness. A small stone arrangement at the edge of the clearing, 3 rocks stacked in a pyramidal formation. This was no natural occurrence. Someone had deliberately placed them, presumably while we slept before I began my watch. I showed Julia, who stared at the stack with widening eyes. "What does it mean?" she asked. A marker, I replied grimly, either for themselves or others. I kicked the formation apart before we left, though I suspected the gesture was ultimately meaningless. Whoever was tracking us didn't need stone markers to maintain pursuit. We maintained a punishing pace that morning, moving as quickly as safety allowed along the rugged trail. Every few minutes, I would stop briefly, listening for sounds of pursuit. Increasingly, I heard them branches breaking too deliberately to be wildlife, occasional glimpses of movement parallel to our route. "There's more than one," I whispered to Julia during a brief water break. "They're coordinating, moving in tandem with us." Her face had taken on the taut expression of someone holding fear at bay through sheer determination. "Who are they? What do they want?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but they've had multiple opportunities to approach normally and haven't. That suggests their intentions aren't friendly." By midday, the psychological toll of feeling hunted began affecting our decision-making. The most direct route to the road access point would keep us on the established trail, which was predictable and potentially monitored. Alternatively, we could forge our own path through unmarked forest, more physically demanding but potentially allowing us to break the pursuit pattern. Off-trail, Julia voted immediately when I presented the options. "I'd rather fight through underbrush than keep being stalked like prey." I agreed, and we veered sharply west at the next opportunity, plunging into dense forest where no clear path existed. The going became immediately more difficult. Thick rhododendron thickets tore at our clothing, hidden depressions threatened twisted ankles, and navigation required constant reference to map and compass. For approximately 2 hours, this gambit appeared successful. The sounds of pursuit faded, and we allowed ourselves cautious optimism that we'd broken contact. Then, crushing that hope, we heard a distinct whistle from somewhere to our north, followed by an answering call from the south. "They're flanking us," I realized aloud, working together to maintain visual contact. Julia's face paled. How could they possibly know which way we'd go?" "They know these woods," I replied, the truth becoming increasingly clear. "This is their territory, not ours." That revelation shifted something fundamental in our understanding of the situation. We weren't experienced hikers facing an unexpected challenge. We were interlopers being herded by people intimately familiar with this landscape. The psychological advantage had never been ours. By late afternoon, our energy flagging from sustained high-speed travel through difficult terrain, we reached a critical juncture. Our path was blocked by a steep ravine, navigable but time-consuming. Circumventing it would add miles to our journey, likely preventing us from reaching the road before nightfall. "We have to go down and up," Julia declared, peering over the edge. "We can't spend another night out here." I nodded agreement, though the descent looked treacherous, nearly 60 degrees in places, with loose soil and few stable handholds. We began carefully, using tree roots and exposed rock formations for support, testing each foothold before committing weight. Halfway down, disaster struck. Julia's handhold, a seemingly sturdy root, pulled free from the embankment. She slid several feet, desperately grasping at passing vegetation, before coming to a stop against a boulder. The commotion sent a cascade of soil and small rocks tumbling to the ravine floor. "I'm okay," she gasped before I could ask, though her right palm was badly scraped. "Just need a minute." That minute proved costly. From above us came the unmistakable sound of multiple people moving quickly through underbrush, drawn by the noise of Julia's fall. They were closing distance rapidly. "We need to move," I urged, helping Julia to her feet. "Right now." We abandoned caution for speed, half climbing, half sliding the remaining distance to the ravine bottom. Above us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. I caught a glimpse of movement, a figure in dark clothing briefly visible at the ravine edge before ducking back from view. The ravine bottom offered momentary concealment via large boulders and fallen trees. We used this cover to assess options. The opposite slope appeared marginally less steep than our descent route, but would still require significant effort that would leave us exposed and vulnerable during the climb. "We could follow the ravine instead," Julia suggested, pointing to where the natural channel widened to the east. "They'd anticipate that," I countered, "and it might lead us further from the road." A sudden sound from above resolved our indecision, the distinct click of metal that my mind instantly recognized as weapon-related. Whether hunting rifle or something else, the implication was clear. Our pursuers were armed and close enough to potentially use those weapons. "Up," I whispered urgently. "Now." We began ascending the opposite slope, using every available tree trunk and rock outcropping for leverage. The physical demand was immense, burning muscles already taxed by miles of forced-pace hiking. Halfway up, Julia stumbled, a small cry of pain escaping before she could suppress it. "Ankle," she managed through gritted teeth. "Twisted, not broken." I glanced back toward the ravine bottom. Movement caught my eye, 2 figures crossing the space we'd vacated moments earlier. They moved with the confidence of trackers who knew they were closing on their quarry. Without hesitation, I positioned myself beside Julia, offering my shoulder for support. "Lean on me, we go together." The remaining ascent became a blur of pain and determination. Julia's breathing came in controlled gasps as she fought through the injury. My own muscles screamed protest at the double burden. When we finally crested the ridge, we collapsed momentarily behind a fallen tree, gasping for breath. "They're still coming," Julia whispered after a moment, nodding toward the slope we'd just conquered. Sounds of pursuit remained evident, though temporarily more distant. "Road should be less than 2 miles northeast," I replied, consulting our map with trembling hands. "Mostly flat terrain, thankfully." Julia tested her injured ankle, wincing. "I can walk, just not quickly." I retrieved the judge from my pack and checked its load. "I'll take point. You follow at whatever pace works. If we get separated, keep heading northeast. Don't stop, don't wait." She nodded grimly, understanding the implication. If confrontation became inevitable, I would handle it while she continued toward safety. As dusk approached, we pushed forward through increasingly dense forest, every step a calculation between speed and stealth. The sounds of pursuit waxed and waned but never disappeared entirely. Occasionally we heard those same whistle communication signals coordinating our hunters' movements. Darkness arrived before we reached the road. With it came the sobering realization that our navigation had been imperfect. The terrain didn't match our map's indications for where we should be. Either we had veered off course during our desperate flight, or the map itself lacked detail for this particular area. "We need to stop and reorient," I finally admitted, after our third encounter with landmarks that shouldn't have been present. "Stopping feels dangerous," Julia replied, leaning against a tree to relieve pressure on her injured ankle. "Getting lost is more dangerous," I countered. "We could end up moving parallel to the road instead of toward it." We found minimal cover behind a rock formation, and I risked using our flashlight under my jacket to study the map more carefully. After several minutes of triangulating visible landmarks against topographical features, I determined our actual position. "We're further south than I thought," I told Julia. "Road access is more like 3 miles now, not 2. Before she could respond, a flicker of light caught my attention through the trees, not the steady beam of a flashlight, but the wavering illumination of flame. A campfire, perhaps a quarter-mile distant. "Other hikers?" Julia whispered hopefully. I shook my head. "Trails nowhere near here, and given recent events." We watched in tense silence as a second light appeared, then a third. The pattern suggested multiple small campfires spread across our eastern approach, routed directly between us and the road access we sought. "It's a line," Julia realized aloud. "They're forming a barrier." The implication chilled me more thoroughly than the October night air. Our pursuers weren't merely following, they were actively containing us, establishing a perimeter to prevent our escape. This level of coordination suggested numbers we hadn't anticipated, and a determination that defied rational explanation. "We need to find a gap or go around," I said, trying to maintain tactical thinking despite escalating fear. "They can't have continuous coverage." Julia's face, barely visible in the darkness, showed a combination of exhaustion and resolve. "Which direction?" I considered our options, factoring in Julia's injury and our dwindling physical resources. "North. Follow the perimeter until we find a breakthrough point." We moved with agonizing slowness, prioritizing silence over speed. Each step required careful placement to avoid the telltale crack of breaking branches. Every few minutes, we would pause to listen and observe, tracking the pattern of distant fires to gauge the perimeter's extent. After approximately an hour of this careful movement, we spotted a potential opening, a darkened gap nearly 50 yards wide between 2 of the flambeaux. Either by design or oversight, this section appeared unmanned. "That's our exit," I whispered, indicating the gap. We advanced cautiously, hyper-aware that appearances could be deceiving. The gap might well contain sentries without fires, their absence of light creating the illusion of safe passage. 20 yards from the perceived perimeter line, disaster struck again. Julia's injured ankle gave way completely on uneven ground, sending her sprawling with a stifled cry of pain. The sound wasn't particularly loud, but in the unnatural stillness of the forest night, it carried. Almost immediately, shouts erupted from multiple locations along the fire line. Flashlight beams cut through darkness, sweeping in widening arcs from our left and right. "They heard us," Julia gasped, struggling to rise. I helped her up, supporting her weight. "Change of plan. No more stealth. We run." "I can't run," she replied, gesturing at her ankle. "Then I'll carry you." What followed tested the absolute limits of human endurance. With Julia on my back, arms around my neck, I pushed forward toward the gap in the perimeter. Each step required tremendous effort, muscles burning with oxygen debt, lungs heaving to supply the necessary air. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, crashing undergrowth, shouted commands, beams of light cutting ever closer. As we approached the perceived gap, a figure suddenly materialized from shadow, a man-shaped silhouette blocking our path. Without breaking stride, I shifted direction, veering sharply right to avoid direct confrontation. "There," a harsh voice called out, "heading north." The shout confirmed our worst fears. We were surrounded by multiple hostiles actively coordinating to intercept us. Our chance of reaching the road undetected had evaporated entirely. I made a split-second decision, one that contradicted all conventional wilderness wisdom. We would abandon any attempt to reach the road and instead head deeper into the forest interior, away from the established perimeter. If we couldn't break through their line, perhaps we could outlast their search efforts by finding sufficiently remote concealment. "Change of direction," I gasped to Julia, turning westward. "We're going back in." "What?" Her voice held understandable confusion. "The road is too well guarded," I interrupted. "We'll find somewhere to hide instead." For the next hour, we pushed deeper into increasingly primitive forest, moving as quickly as my burdened pace allowed. The sounds of pursuit gradually diminished behind us, not disappeared, but attenuated by distance and terrain. When we finally reached the base of a steep ridge, I carefully lowered Julia against a tree trunk. "We need to rest," I admitted, my entire body trembling with exertion. "Just briefly." Julia nodded, her face pale with pain and exhaustion. "Who are these people? Why are they doing this?" I had no answers that wouldn't terrify her further. Instead, I focused on our immediate survival. There should be a natural cave system in this ridge, according to the map. If we can locate an entrance, it might provide defensible shelter. After 10 minutes of necessary recovery, we began searching the ridge base for cave openings. The geological composition, predominantly limestone with significant erosion patterns, suggested numerous possibilities. Eventually, Julia spotted what we needed, a narrow fissure partially concealed by vegetation, just wide enough for human passage. I examined the opening carefully, checking for signs of animal habitation or instability. Finding neither, we squeezed through into absolute darkness. I risked using our flashlight briefly to assess the interior. The space opened into a modest chamber approximately 15 feet in diameter with a ceiling height that allowed us to stand upright. Multiple smaller passages branched from the main chamber, though none appeared to offer better concealment than our current position. "This works," I declared, helping Julia to a relatively flat section of floor. "We can defend this entrance if necessary." While Julia rested, I created minimal barricades near the entrance, loose stones and branches arranged to create noise if disturbed. I positioned myself where I could monitor the opening while maintaining coverage of Julia's position. "Will they find us?" she asked after a long silence. "Eventually," I answered honestly, "but hopefully not before daylight. By then, we'll have recovered enough strength to try again." She nodded, accepting this grim assessment. "Thank you for not leaving me behind." "That was never an option," I replied, reaching for her hand in the darkness. We settled into uneasy vigilance, taking turns staying alert while the other rested. Hours passed with only distant sounds of search activity, occasional shouts, whistles, once even what sounded like hounds baying far to our south. Around what I estimated to be 3 a.m., the search sounds intensified again, closer, more purposeful. They had adjusted their perimeter, narrowing the search grid to include our general vicinity. "They're methodical," I whispered to Julia. "Professional, almost." "But who?" she asked again. "Poachers? Drug operations?" "Maybe," I conceded, though neither explanation fully satisfied. The level of coordination and persistence suggested something more organized, more deeply entrenched in these remote forests. As dawn approached, bringing the faintest lightening of the cave entrance, we heard the sound I'd been dreading, voices directly outside our hiding place, within yards of the concealed opening. "Tracks end here," a gruff voice announced. "Check the brush line." Julia's eyes widened in the dim light, her hand finding mine in silent communication. I positioned myself between her and the entrance, the judge revolver ready. "Got something," another voice called. "Disturbed vegetation, might be a hole." The sound of boots on stone followed someone approaching the very fissure we'd used for entry. I raised the weapon, preparing for the confrontation that now seemed inevitable. A beam of light pierced the opening, sweeping across the cave interior. I pressed myself against the wall, momentarily out of its direct path. The light paused, then began a more systematic examination of the space. Just as the beam would have revealed our position, a distant voice called out urgently, "All units, contact at the eastern ridge. Respond immediately." The light beam wavered, then withdrew. Boots scraped on stone as our searcher apparently abandoned the cave investigation to respond to the new development. "Lucky," Julia breathed after several minutes of renewed silence. "Or someone else they're hunting," I replied grimly. "Either way, this is our chance." We waited 15 tense minutes to ensure the searchers had truly departed, before cautiously emerging from our cave shelter. The forest had transformed yet again, with approaching dawnbirds beginning their morning communications, dew glistening on every surface, visibility gradually improving with the lightening sky. Julia tested her ankle and reported improvement, though still far from fully functional. "Which way?" she asked. I oriented myself using the emerging sunlight. "East, directly toward the road. They've apparently shifted focus north, which might give us the opening we need." We moved as quickly as Julia's injury permitted, taking advantage of the transitional lighting conditions bright enough to navigate efficiently, but still dim enough to provide some concealment. The forest showed increasing signs of human activity: trampled vegetation, occasional boot prints, once even a discarded food wrapper that looked disturbingly recent. After approximately an hour of careful progress, the terrain began sloping downward, and I detected the distant rumble of vehicular traffic, the road we'd been seeking for nearly 24 hours. "We're close," I encouraged Julia, who was pushing through obvious pain with remarkable determination. "I hear it," she confirmed, renewed hope energizing her movements. We crested a small rise, and there it was, a 2-lane asphalt road winding through the valley below us, perhaps half a mile distant. The sight nearly overwhelmed me with emotion. After hours of terror and exhaustion, civilization beckoned with its promise of safety and rationality. "We made it," Julia whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Almost," I cautioned. "We still need to cross that final distance." The intervening terrain offered both advantages and dangers: primarily open forest with good visibility, but minimal cover if we needed concealment. We would be exposed during our final approach. "Direct route?" Julia asked. I considered briefly, then nodded. "Speed over stealth now. If we're spotted, we make a run for it regardless of consequences." We descended the slope with renewed purpose, eyes constantly scanning for threats, while maintaining maximum possible pace. 300 yards from the road. 200. 100. With each step, I allowed myself incrementally more hope that we would emerge from this ordeal intact. At approximately 50 yards from the road's shoulder, a vehicle appeared, an older model pickup truck traveling slowly along our approach route. I pulled Julia behind a large tree trunk, watching cautiously to determine if the truck represented threat or opportunity. "Forest Service," Julia suggested hopefully, noting the vehicle's dull green color. Before I could respond, the truck stopped directly opposite our position. The driver's door opened, and a man emerged, middle-aged, bearded, dressed in camouflage clothing that didn't match any official uniform I recognized. He scanned the forest edge methodically, then reached back into the truck for what appeared to be a radio handset. "They're still maintaining the perimeter," I whispered, watching the road. Julia's expression hardened with resolve. We didn't come this far to be stopped now. "Agreed," I replied, formulating a plan. "When he looks away, we cross at maximum speed further down. Don't stop for anything until we reach the opposite side." We watched intently, waiting for our moment. The man completed his radio communication, then walked to the truck's rear to retrieve something from the bed. As he became temporarily obscured by his vehicle, I signaled Julia. "Now." We burst from cover, running parallel to the road for approximately 30 yards before cutting directly toward the asphalt. The man shouted behind us he'd spotted our movement, but we maintained our desperate pace, ignoring everything except the road ahead. Tires squealed as the truck accelerated in pursuit. I pushed Julia ahead of me, turning briefly to confirm the threat. The vehicle was gaining rapidly, the driver's face visible through the windshield contorted with what appeared to be anger rather than surprise. "Keep going," I shouted to Julia. "Cross and don't stop." As we reached the road's edge, the truck closed to within yards of our position. In that moment of maximum vulnerability, fate intervened in the form of another vehicle approaching from the opposite direction, a silver SUV traveling at normal highway speed. I seized the opportunity, pushing into the road directly in front of the oncoming SUV while waving both arms frantically. The driver hit their brakes, tires skidding on asphalt as they fought to avoid collision. The truck pursuing us immediately slowed, then reversed direction, apparently unwilling to continue the chase with witnesses present. It accelerated away as the SUV came to a complete stop beside us. An elderly couple stared through the windows with expressions of absolute shock, first at our disheveled appearance, then at the retreating truck. "Please," I gasped, supporting Julia, who had collapsed against me. "We need help. People are hunting us in these woods." The elderly couple, Warren and Patricia from North Carolina, proved to be our salvation. They immediately offered assistance, helped us into their vehicle, and transported us to the nearest police station in the town of Cedar Bluff, approximately 20 miles from where they'd found us. The local sheriff's department took our statements with a combination of professional concern and subtle skepticism. We described the pursuit, the coordinated search patterns, the perimeter of fires, and our desperate flight through unfamiliar terrain. Deputies documented Julia's injuries and our general condition, then consulted among themselves while we waited, exhausted beyond measure, in a small interview room. "We've had reports of unusual activity in those areas before," the sheriff finally informed us, returning with coffee and prepackaged sandwiches. "Nothing confirmed, but similar stories from other hikers over the years." "Similar how?" I asked. "People feeling watched, unexplained camp disturbances. One couple reported items stolen 2 years back." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "But nothing at this scale or intensity." "What about the fires, the coordinated search?" "There were multiple people involved," Julia insisted. The sheriff nodded without committing. "We'll investigate, certainly. Send deputies to the area you've indicated, but those forests cover thousands of acres of extremely remote territory." I understood the subtext. Even with their best efforts, finding evidence of our pursuers would be nearly impossible, especially if, as I suspected, those individuals were intimately familiar with the terrain and accustomed to avoiding official attention. The authorities arranged motel accommodations for us while they processed our report. Julia's ankle received proper medical attention, a moderate sprain, requiring several weeks of recovery but no permanent damage. Our physical wounds would heal relatively quickly. The psychological impact would prove more persistent. In the following days, as we recovered enough strength to return home, we learned fragments of local history that might explain our experience. The region had a complex past, former mining communities abandoned when operations ceased, generations of families living off-grid in increasingly isolated enclaves, territorial disputes between various groups claiming ancestral rights to certain forest sections. Some of those hollows haven't welcomed outsiders in decades, a gas station attendant remarked when we mentioned our general hiking route. Folks there keep to themselves and expect others to respect boundaries, written on maps or not. Whether our pursuers represented territorial residents, illegal operations requiring privacy, or something else entirely, we would never definitively know. The sheriff's investigation yielded nothing conclusive: a few abandoned campsites, some unusual trail modifications, but nothing directly connecting to our experience. We returned to Richmond, fundamentally changed. Our relationship survived but transformed, strengthened in some ways by shared trauma, challenged in others by the lingering effects of sustained fear. Julia continued hiking eventually, though never again in remote areas. I haven't returned to any wilderness trail, my former passion for isolation permanently tainted by memories of those October nights. Sometimes, particularly when autumn leaves begin changing colors, I find myself staring into forest edges with involuntary vigilance, searching for movement that doesn't align with natural patterns. In moments of insufficient sleep or stress, I imagine hearing those coordinating whistles from the darkness beyond our suburban home. The most disturbing aspect remains the purposefulness of our pursuers. They weren't merely territorial residents warning away trespassers. Their methods suggested something more systematic, more practiced. The perimeter of fires, the coordinated search patterns, the radio communications all indicated a group accustomed to hunting human quarry through difficult terrain. For what purpose, I remain grateful not to know. I tell this story not to discourage wilderness exploration but to advise caution. Nature itself presents sufficient challenges without adding human malevolence to the equation. Maps define parks and public lands with reassuring clarity, but reality proves messier. Some territories remain effectively claimed despite official designations, and those claims may be enforced by means no regulation anticipates. If you hike the Southern Appalachian Trail, particularly those remote sections through Jefferson National Forest, stay on marked paths. Camp only at designated sites where other hikers might pass. And if you sense that crawling sensation between your shoulder blades that signals unseen observation, trust your instincts. Not all who watch from forest shadows welcome your presence, and some boundaries exist only in the understanding of those who have always lived beyond civilization's comfortable reach. The year 2020 had been merciless. By late October, I had grown weary of the isolation, the constant stream of bad news, and the disappointment that followed the cancellation of every significant milestone that should have marked my senior year. Our graduation ceremony reduced to a drive-through event where we collected our diplomas through car windows while wearing masks felt like the final insult. Some of my classmates didn't even participate in the online classes, meaning they didn't graduate at all. The pandemic had stolen something irreplaceable from us. As Halloween approached, I found myself staring at my bedroom ceiling, scrolling through old photos from previous celebrations. The idea formed gradually. What if we could reclaim some normalcy, even for just one night? I knew it was against regulations. The social distancing mandates were clear, but after months of compliance and sacrifice, my patience had worn thin. We needed this. My apartment wasn't suitable. The last party I'd hosted resulted in several valuable items disappearing. I needed a different location, somewhere isolated enough to avoid complaints but comfortable enough to host a small group. I opened Discord and messaged my closest friends about potential venues. My girlfriend Leanne immediately responded with enthusiasm but had no suggestions. It was her friend Sam who offered the solution during our video call later that evening. "What about that cabin your third cousin owns?" Sam suggested, her face illuminated by blue screen light. "The one in the pine forest?" "Why are you so interested?" I asked, surprised by her eagerness. Sam's expression brightened. "Think about it, it's Halloween. A blue moon on a Saturday, during the weirdest year of our lives. Plus, I finally got time off work. It's perfect." She made compelling points. My third cousin Lance had moved to California months ago for a teaching position, leaving his remote property vacant except for occasional visits from his husband Francis. The cabin sat on nearly 6 acres of woodland, far enough from neighbors to avoid noise complaints. I sent Francis a message asking for permission, not expecting a quick response. To my surprise, he replied within minutes, "Sure, just don't trash the place, and no alcohol." The latter stipulation made me hesitate. What's a Halloween party without drinks? But I sent back my agreement anyway. With location secured, I created a group chat with the invitation details. I kept the list small. Cameron, who'd been my friend since middle school, Adam, who I knew from my computer science classes, Leanne, my girlfriend of 2 years, and Sam, who had become part of our circle through Leanne. 5 people total, small enough to be relatively safe, large enough to feel like a real celebration. The responses came quickly. Everyone was in. As I made preparations over the next few days, I couldn't shake a persistent uneasiness. The last time I'd visited Lance's cabin 2 years ago, I'd experienced something disturbing in those woods, something I'd tried to rationalize away but never quite could. I hadn't told many people about it, certainly not in detail. Only Leanne knew the full story, though I'd mentioned it vaguely to the others. Would returning there be tempting fate? I pushed the thought aside. Whatever I'd seen or thought I'd seen before was probably just wildlife, my imagination enhanced by darkness and solitude. With friends around, there would be nothing to fear. How catastrophically wrong I would prove to be. The drive to the cabin took just under 2 hours, winding through increasingly remote countryside as suburban developments gave way to scattered farms, then to dense woodland. Cell service became spotty 15 minutes before I reached my destination, and I made mental note to warn the others. I arrived first, as planned, to prepare the space. The cabin sat nestled among towering pines, its weathered exterior blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. A wraparound porch circled the structure, and large windows reflected the afternoon sunlight. Despite its rustic charm, the isolation struck me immediately. The nearest neighbor was at least 2 miles away. The gravel driveway crunched under my tires as I parked. When I cut the engine, the silence was complete. No traffic noise, no distant conversations, not even the ambient hum of electricity that forms the background soundtrack of urban life, just the occasional whisper of wind through pine needles and the calls of birds I couldn't identify. I retrieved the key from beneath a false rock in the garden, just where Francis had said it would be, and entered the cabin. The door hinges protested with a drawn-out creak that seemed to echo through the silent rooms. The air inside smelled of wood and dust, with undertones of the pine forest that surrounded us. The main living area featured a stone fireplace, flanked by bookshelves filled with outdated field guides and dog-eared paperbacks. A large sectional sofa faced the fireplace, and a wooden dining table with 6 chairs occupied the adjacent space. The kitchen, though small, was well equipped, and a hallway led to 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. I began unloading supplies from my car, snacks, decorations, sodas, and despite my promise to Francis a significant quantity of alcohol hidden in innocent-looking grocery bags. As I arranged everything, I continued to feel a strange disquiet. The cabin seemed to absorb sound in a way that made every footstep, every movement, feel muffled and distant. Outside, the afternoon light was already beginning to fade. October days were short this far north, and the tall pines surrounding the property accelerated the transition to darkness. I turned on every light in the cabin, pushing back against the growing shadows. I unpacked my steampunk-plagued Dr. Costumea full-face leather mask with glass-eye lenses and an extended beak, a black wide-brimmed hat, a long coat, and gloves. I had ordered it months ago as a darkly ironic nod to the pandemic. As I laid it out on my bed, I caught a glimpse of movement through the bedroom window. I approached the glass and peered out into the growing gloom. Nothing moved in the tree linny, at least. Nothing I could see. Yet the sense of being observed persisted, raising goosebumps on my arms despite the cabin's warmth. I quickly stepped away from the window and continued my preparations, attributing the sensation to memories of my previous experience here. By the time I finished setting up, the forest had been swallowed by darkness except where the cabin's exterior lights carved yellow pools into the night. The party decorations' fake cobwebs, plastic skeletons, and battery-operated candles transformed the rustic interior into something appropriately spooky yet inviting. A text message notification broke the silence. Cameron was 20 minutes away. The others would arrive shortly thereafter. I took a deep breath, put on some music to fill the unsettling quiet, and tried to focus on the celebration ahead rather than the darkness pressing against the windows and the persistent feeling that something waited beyond the light's reach. The sound of tires on gravel announced Cameron's arrival. I stepped onto the porch as his headlights swept across the front of the cabin, briefly illuminating the surrounding trees. He emerged from his car wearing one of those LED purge masks that had become popular in recent years, the eerie blue glow distorting his features. "Nice place," he said, removing the mask as he approached. "Isolated enough that no one will call the cops on us." He handed me a 6-pack of hard cider. "Brought provisions." "Perfect," I said, helping him unload more drinks from his trunk. "The others should be here soon." We had barely finished storing the alcohol when Leanne's car appeared on the winding driveway. She stepped out wearing her Little Red Riding Hood Costumea modernized version, with a short red dress, knee-high boots, and a hooded cape that fell to her waist. "Very appropriate for the woods," I noted as I embraced her. "I thought so," she replied, looking around at our surroundings, "though maybe not the most comfortable choice for running from predators." I laughed, but her words sent an involuntary shiver through me. "Let's hope you won't need to." Sam arrived 15 minutes later in a car she'd borrowed from her parents. Her anime cat girl costume, complete with ears, tail, and painted whiskers, seemed jarringly childish compared to the imposing darkness of the forest around us. "This place is amazing," she exclaimed, spinning in a circle to take in the cabin and surrounding woods. "Exactly how I imagined it from your descriptions." Adam was the last to arrive, pulling up in his pickup truck just after sunset. His zombie soldier costume was impressively detailed, with tattered military fatigues and professionally applied makeup that made his skin appear decayed. He carried a duffel bag over his shoulder that seemed unusually heavy. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Got lost twice. GPS is useless out here." With everyone present, the party properly began. We gathered in the living room, where I had set up a makeshift bar on a side table. Cameron connected his phone to the portable speaker I'd brought, filling the cabin with music. The combination of alcohol, familiar company, and the isolation from the outside world created a bubble of normalcy that we had all been craving. As the evening progressed, we played drinking games, shared stories, and allowed ourselves to forget temporarily about the chaos of the outside world. By midnight, we had transitioned to watching horror movies on the laptop I'd brought along, the fictional scares providing a comfortable distance from real-world anxieties. During a break between films, Sam turned to me with curious eyes. "So, Javier, you never really told us the full story about what happened to you here before." The room grew quieter as the others tuned in. I took a long sip of my drink, considering how much to share. The alcohol had loosened my inhibitions enough that the experience no longer seemed too embarrassing to discuss. "It was 2 years ago," I began. "Lance invited me up here to help him install some new fixtures. I stayed an extra day after he left to do some hiking. I was completely alone." "That's already a horror movie setup," Cameron interjected. I nodded. It was getting dark, and I was heading back to the cabin when I heard something following me on the trail. At first I thought it was a deer or maybe a coyote. "But it wasn't," Leanne prompted, though she already knew the story. "No, whatever was following me was big. When I stopped walking, it stopped too. When I moved, it moved. It was mimicking me, stalking me." The memory sent another wave of discomfort through me. I finally caught a glimpse of it between the trees. It was tall, at least 6 feet, moving on all fours with a strange fluid motion that didn't look natural. "Like a bear?" Adam suggested. "Bears don't stalk people like that," I said, and it had a long snout and tail. In the dark, with just my flashlight, it looked. I hesitated. "Like a werewolf," Sam finished for me, her eyes wide with excitement rather than fear. "I know how it sounds," I said defensively. "I was alone, it was dark, and I was scared, but I know I saw something." "Did you report it?" Adam asked. "To who? The forest ranger?" "Excuse me, I'd like to report a werewolf sighting." I shook my head. I convinced myself it was just a wolf or a coyote, maybe a mountain lion, and my imagination filled in the rest. "But you don't really believe that?" Sam pressed. I met her gaze. "I don't know what I saw," I admitted, "but whatever it wasn't a normal animal." The conversation shifted to other topics as we started the next movie, but I noticed Sam's thoughtful expression. She kept glancing toward the windows, where our reflections were superimposed over the impenetrable darkness outside. The horror movie marathon continued past 2 a.m., our nerves frayed by fictional terrors while real darkness pressed against the cabin windows. We had progressed from beer and cider to stronger drinks, and the combination of alcohol and adrenaline from jump scares had created a peculiar atmosphere, half giddy, half tense. During a particularly gruesome scene in the third Saw film, Sam abruptly stood up. "I need some air," she announced, stretching dramatically. "There's plenty of it on the porch," I suggested, not taking my eyes off the screen. "No, I mean real air, forest air." She moved toward the door, grabbing her jacket. "Plus, it's a blue moon on Halloween. When else will I get a chance to experience that?" Leanne sat forward. "You're not going out there alone, are you?" "It's just woods," Sam replied with exaggerated casualness that didn't quite mask her excitement. "Besides, I want to see if I can spot Javier's werewolf." I turned to her then, alarmed by the recklessness in her voice. "That's a terrible idea. It's past 2 in the morning, we've been drinking, and it's easy to get lost out there." "I'm not going far," she insisted, "just down the driveway a bit." "The last time I was here," I said firmly, "I encountered something dangerous. I wasn't making that up for entertainment." Sam rolled her eyes. "It was probably just a big dog. It wasn't a dog. My voice came out sharper than intended. Look, if you want to go wandering around in the dark forest by yourself, be my guest. But if you get attacked or lost, don't expect me to come running after you. I had hoped to scare her into staying, but Sam's expression only brightened with challenge. Fine. I'll be back in 15 minutes. With that, she slipped out the door before anyone could stop her. We returned our attention to the movie, but my focus was broken. Every few minutes I glanced toward the door, expecting Sam to return with her adventure aborted. When 10 minutes passed with no sign of her, uneasiness began to build in my stomach. She should have been back by now, Leanne said, voicing my concerns. She moved to the window, trying to peer into the darkness. I can't see anything out there. She's probably just trying to scare us, Cameron suggested, but his tone lacked conviction. Another 5 minutes passed, then 10. The movie ended, and still no Sam. Something's wrong, Leanne said, reaching for her jacket. We need to find her. Cameron nodded in agreement, already pulling on his shoes. Adam looked uncomfortable. Maybe I should stay here in case she comes back. Under normal circumstances, I might have accused him of cowardice, but his suggestion was practical. Good idea. If we all go searching and she returns to an empty cabin, she'll think we abandoned her. Take this, Adam said, reaching into his duffel bag and pulling out a hunting rifle that instantly silenced the room. Why did you bring that? I asked, startled. I always bring protection when I go to remote areas, he replied with a shrug, but I think you should take it. I hesitated before declining. No, you keep it here. We'll take flashlights. I didn't mention that my hands were shaking too much to trust myself with a firearm. We gathered our flashlights and cell phones, though I warned that reception was non-existent beyond the clearing. I put on my plague doctor mask for warmth. Its leather would shield my face from branches, while Cameron donned his purge mask with its built-in light. Leanne pulled up her red hood. Before stepping outside, I turned to Adam. If we're not back in an hour, call for help. I didn't specify what kind of help might be available in these remote woods, and he didn't ask. The night air hit us with shocking coldness after the cabin's warmth. Our breath formed clouds in the beam of our flashlights. The moon, full and tinged slightly blue as promised, provided minimal illumination through the dense canopy. Sam, Leanne called, her voice seeming small against the vastness of the forest. We moved down the gravel driveway, calling periodically and sweeping our lights across the underbrush. The further we went from the cabin, the more oppressive the silence became, broken only by our footsteps and calls. The forest seemed to absorb sound in an unnatural way, as if it were listening, waiting. I don't like this, Cameron muttered after we'd walked about a quarter mile. Neither did I, but I kept that thought to myself. Instead, I focused on scanning the woods for any sign of movement, any flash of Sam's reflective costume elements. Then I heard a soft rustling to our right, just beyond the reach of our flashlights. Did you hear that? I whispered, directing my flashlight toward the sound. Cameron nodded, the blue glow of his mask making his gesture ghostly. Could be Sam. Sam, Leanne called again, louder this time. This isn't funny anymore. No response came, but the rustling continued, moving parallel to us. Something was keeping pace with our progress down the road. I fought the rising panic in my chest, focusing instead on rational explanations. Wind in the branches, a raccoon or a possum, perhaps a deer watching us cautiously from the safety of the trees. But when we stopped walking, the rustling stopped too, just as it had 2 years ago. Turn off your flashlights, I instructed, my voice tight. What? Why would we? Cameron began. Just do it, I insisted. Trust me. Reluctantly, they complied. The darkness that engulfed us was absolute. The moon, despite being full, provided little illumination through the dense canopy of pine branches overhead. As my eyes adjusted, I could barely make out Leanne's silhouette beside me. We stood in silence for nearly a minute, my ears strained against the quiet, picking up the soft whisper of wind, the distant call of a night bird, and our own breathing, too loud in the stillness. Then I heard the deliberate sound of movement in the underbrush, drawing closer. Whatever was there had been waiting for us to resume walking. Now it was approaching on its own. Turn them back on, I said urgently. Now. Our lights came on simultaneously, beams sweeping frantically toward the sound. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of something retreating into the deeper shadows, something low to the ground but substantial, moving with unsettling speed and purpose. What was that? Leanne's voice trembled slightly. Before I could answer, a scream tore through the night, human, female, and terrified. It came from somewhere ahead of us, deeper into the woods beyond the road. Sam! Leanne bolted toward the sound, her red cape fluttering behind her like a warning flag. Wait, I called, but she was already plunging into the trees. Cameron and I had no choice but to follow, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we ran, creating a disorienting strobe effect among the pines. We crashed through underbrush, guided only by Leanne's bobbing flashlight ahead and the direction from which we'd heard the scream. Branches clawed at our clothes, roots threatened to trip us with every step, and the darkness seemed to push against us with physical force. Leanne, slow down, I called, gasping for breath. The plague doctor mask made breathing difficult as I ran, but I dared not remove it. The glass eye lenses were the only thing protecting my vision from whipping branches. Suddenly, Leanne's light stopped moving. We caught up to find her standing rigid, her beam fixed on a small clearing ahead. In the center stood Sam, her costume torn and dirty, her painted whiskers smeared by tears or sweat. Sam, thank God, Leanne rushed forward to embrace her friend. But Sam didn't move to meet her. She remained frozen, staring not at us but at something beyond the clearing's edge. We need to go, Sam said, her voice a hoarse whisper. Now, right now. What happened? I approached cautiously, scanning the trees behind her. Did you fall? Are you hurt? I saw it, she said, finally looking at me. I saw what you saw before. It's real, Javier, and it's not alone. A cold weight settled in my stomach. How many? 3, maybe 4. They're circling us. As if confirming her words, a low growl emerged from the darkness to our left. It was joined by another from behind us, then a third from the right. The sounds were unlike anything I'd heard before, not quite wolf, not quite bear, carrying harmonics that seemed almost human yet fundamentally wrong. We instinctively moved closer together, forming a tight cluster with our flashlights pointing outward. In the narrow beams, I caught brief glimpses of movement, dark shapes flowing between trees with disturbing grace, always just at the edge of visibility. What do they want? Cameron's voice cracked with fear. Us, Sam replied simply. They've been herding us deeper into the woods, away from the road. The realization hit me with terrifying clarity. We had been manipulated, drawn away from safety by creatures that displayed unmistakable intelligence and coordination. These were not mindless animals, but predators with strategy. We need to get back to the cabin, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Stay together, move slowly toward the road. Don't run, that's what they want. As we began to edge backward, one of the creatures moved into the periphery of my flashlight beam. My throat constricted at the sight of a massive form, powerfully built, moving on all fours yet with a fluidity that suggested it could rise to 2 legs if it chose. Its eyes reflected the light back at me, glowing with eerie intelligence. Then it was gone, melting into the shadows before I could process more details. They're getting closer, Leanne whispered, her hand finding mine in the darkness. The growls intensified. Now coming from all directions, we were surrounded. Our flashlights, once seeming powerful against the night, now revealed only tantalizing glimpses of our stalkers, never enough to fully comprehend what we were facing. On 3, I said, my decision made. We run, straight through the gap between those 2 pines. Ready? 1, 2. The world exploded with sound before I could say 3. The thunderous crack of a gunshot reverberated through the forest, temporarily silencing everything, the growls, the rustling, even the night insects. We froze, startled by the unexpected intervention. A second shot followed, this one closer, deliberately fired into the air rather than at any target. The sound came from the direction of the road, where a flashlight beam stronger than ours now swept through the trees. Javier, Leanne, Adam's voice called out. Cameron, Sam, where are you? Here, we shouted in unison, our voices breaking with relief. The growls resumed, but more distant now, retreating from the new threat. We took advantage of the distraction, moving quickly toward Adam's voice and light. When we emerged onto the gravel road, I nearly collapsed with relief. Adam stood there, rifle held competently against his shoulder, scanning the tree line. I heard screaming, he explained, not taking his eyes from the forest. When you didn't come back, I got worried. Thank God you came, Cameron said, bending over with his hands on his knees as he caught his breath. What were those things? Leanne asked, her arm protectively around Sam's shoulders. Adam finally looked at us. I only got a glimpse. Big, definitely predators. Wolves, maybe? But his expression betrayed doubt. Not wolves, Sam said firmly. Not like any animal I've ever seen. We hurried back toward the cabin, Adam taking the rear position with his rifle ready. The walk seemed twice as long as before, each shadow potentially concealing another creature. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being allowed to retreat, that the gunshots had merely interrupted rather than ended our encounter. The cabin's lights were a beacon of safety in the oppressive darkness. We rushed inside, locking the door behind us with hands that couldn't seem to stop shaking. In the harsh interior light, I could see the physical evidence of our ordeal: scratches on exposed skin, torn clothing, pine needles and dirt clinging to us. Sam looked the worst, her costume ripped in multiple places, a long scratch across her forearm that was just beginning to bead with blood. Leanne led her to the bathroom to clean the wound while Cameron collapsed onto the sofa, pulling off his mask to reveal a face pale with lingering fear. "What happened out there?" Adam asked, setting his rifle carefully on the dining table before checking the windows to ensure they were securely locked. I removed my plague doctor mask, grateful to breathe freely again. Sam went missing. We went looking for her. Something found us instead, multiple somethings. I went out to look for the creature Javier had seen before, Sam called from the bathroom. I thought it was just a story I didn't believe, her voice caught. "She found them," Leanne continued, emerging with antibiotic ointment and bandages. "Or they found her." "I was walking along the road," Sam said, returning to the living room with her arm freshly bandaged. "Just enjoying the night air, looking at the moon. Then I heard something following me. When I turned around, nothing was there, but when I started walking again, I could hear it keeping pace with me." Her account matched my experience from 2 years ago with disturbing precision. I tried to head back, but I got disoriented. Then I saw eyes reflecting my flashlight too high off the ground for a normal animal. I panicked and ran into the woods, which was stupid, I know. She looked down at her hands. They could have caught me if they wanted to. They were toying with me, herding me deeper in. "Wolves don't behave like that," Adam said, frowning. "These weren't wolves," I replied. "Not ordinary ones, anyway." Leanne gave me a warning look. "Let's not jump to supernatural conclusions. I'm not saying they were werewolves," I clarified, though the thought had certainly crossed my mind. "But they weren't normal wildlife either. They displayed coordinated hunting tactics, intelligence." "Wolves hunt in packs," Cameron offered weakly. "Not like this," Sam insisted. "They were communicating, planning. One would drive me in a specific direction, then another would appear ahead to redirect me. They could have taken me down at any point, but they were leading me somewhere." A heavy silence fell over the room as we considered the implications. Outside, the wind had picked up, branches scraping against the cabin's exterior like fingernails on wood. "Could they have been people?" Leanne suggested. "Some kind of sick hunting game?" "No person moves like that," I said firmly, "and the sounds they made, those weren't human." Adam checked his watch. "It's almost 4 a.m. We should try to get some rest. I'll take first watch." "Watch," Cameron repeated. "You think they might try to get in?" Adam gestured toward the window. "I think whatever's out there isn't finished with us. Better safe than sorry." I moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The yard appeared empty, illuminated only by the porch light and security floodlight at the corner of the cabin. Beyond that, the forest was an impenetrable wall of shadow. But as I watched, I caught a flicker of movement at the tree line, something large shifting position, watching the cabin. Then another movement to its right, and another to the left. They were still out there, surrounding us, waiting. We established a rotation of lookouts: Adam first, then me, followed by Cameron, with the women exempt due to Sam's injury and Leanne's insistence on tending to her. I tried to sleep during my off hours, but managed only a fitful doze punctuated by startling awake at every creak of the cabin's timbers. When Adam woke me for my shift at 5:30 a.m., the first hints of dawn had begun to lighten the eastern sky. I took up position in the living room, rifle across my lap as Adam had shown me how to hold it. I had never fired a gun before, but Adam had given me basic instructions: safety off, aim, squeeze the trigger gradually rather than pulling it suddenly. The pre-dawn hours passed with excruciating slowness. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound outside potentially signaling an approach. Twice I rose to check the windows, convinced I had seen movement, only to find nothing definitive, just the forest, gradually becoming visible as darkness retreated. By 7 a.m., sunlight filtered through the trees, revealing a landscape transformed by morning frost. The clearing around the cabin sparkled with ice crystals, beautiful and serene. It seemed impossible that the same peaceful setting had harbored such terror hours before. I woke Cameron for his shift, then joined Leanne in the kitchen where she was brewing coffee. She looked exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes suggesting she'd gotten no more sleep than I had. "How's Sam?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Finally sleeping," Leanne replied. "The scratch isn't deep, thankfully. Probably from a branch rather than—" She didn't finish the sentence. We sipped our coffee in silence, both watching the trees beyond the window. In daylight, the forest seemed innocuous, just pines and undergrowth, nothing to suggest the presence of abnormal predators. "Do you think they're gone?" Leanne finally asked. "I hope so," I said, unwilling to offer false reassurance. "Most predators hunt at night." "What are they, Javier, really?" I hesitated. "I don't know. Something adapted to these woods, something that's learned to hunt humans." "But you've been thinking about it for 2 years, she pressed. "You must have theories." I had theories. Of course, hours of late-night research into cryptid sightings, genetic anomalies in wolf populations, even government experiments gone wrong. Nothing had provided satisfactory explanations for what I'd encountered. "Whatever they are," I said finally, "they're intelligent, organized, and they see us as prey. That's all that matters right now." Cameron joined us, pouring himself coffee with hands that still trembled slightly. "Everything's quiet outside, no sign of movement." "We should leave," Leanne said firmly. "Pack up and go while it's daylight." I nodded my agreement. As soon as Sam wakes up, we began gathering our belongings, moving with the quiet efficiency of people in shock. Adam cleaned and stowed his rifle, explaining that his family had hunted for generations and he'd learned marksmanship from his grandfather. "I never actually shot at them," he clarified. "Just warning shots." "Good thing," I replied. "I think killing one would have made the others more aggressive." Sam emerged from her room around 9 a.m., looking pale but composed. Her bandaged arm was held protectively against her chest, but she insisted she could drive. "I'm not staying another minute," she declared. We packed the cars quickly, eager to put distance between ourselves and the forest. As I locked the cabin, performing a final check to ensure we'd left everything in order, Adam approached with a concerned expression. "Do you smell that?" he asked. I paused, inhaling deeply. A musky odor hung in the air, animal but not quite familiar, like wet dog combined with something more acrid. It hadn't been present when we arrived yesterday. "They've been marking territory," Adam said quietly, "around the entire cabin. It's a warning." I scanned the tree line one last time before hurrying to my car. The others were already in their vehicles, engines running, waiting only for my signal to depart. As I slid behind the wheel, movement caught my eye just at the forest's edge, partially concealed by undergrowth. One of the creatures stood watching us, more visible in daylight than it had been in darkness. Its size confirmed my worst fear, standing on all fours. It easily reached 4 feet at the shoulder, its body lean yet powerful. The shape was canine, yet wrong somehow, proportions slightly off, limbs too long, jaw too heavy. Its fur was a mottled gray-brown that provided perfect camouflage among the pines. But it was the eyes that froze my blood amber yellow and unmistakably intelligent, watching our departure with what appeared to be calculation rather than mere animal curiosity. I started the engine and led our small convoy down the gravel driveway. In my rearview mirror, I could see more shapes emerging from the trees to watch us leave 3, 4, possibly 5 distinct forms. They made no move to pursue, seemingly content to reclaim their territory. None of us spoke about what we'd seen until we reached the main highway, signal bars finally returning to our phones. We pulled into a roadside diner, ordering breakfast that none of us had much appetite for. "We need to report this," Leanne said eventually. "Some kind of dangerous pack is living in those woods. People need to be warned." "And tell them what?" I countered. "That we were chased by monsters while trespassing at a Halloween party during a pandemic lockdown?" "They weren't monsters," Adam said quietly. "Just animals. Unusually large wolves, maybe wolf-dog hybrids gone feral. It happens." Sam shook her head vehemently. "Those weren't just wolves, hybrid or otherwise. The way they moved, the way they coordinated, they were hunting us specifically. The Rangers should know, Cameron insisted. Whatever explanation there is, those things are dangerous. In the end, we compromised. Adam called the Regional Forest Service office, reporting a sighting of unusually large predators near the cabin's coordinates. He described them as possible wolf-dog hybrids, aggressive but avoiding direct confrontation. The ranger who took the call seemed concerned but not alarmed, promising to send someone to investigate. None of us mentioned the intelligence we'd witnessed, the deliberate herding tactics, or the impossible size and proportions. Some details seemed too fantastical to share, too likely to undermine the credibility of our warning. As we prepared to go our separate ways, a subdued mood settled over our group. The shared experience had changed something between us, created a bond of survival but also of doubt and unanswered questions. "What happens now?" Sam asked, her injured arm cradled against her chest. "We go home," I said. "We try to make sense of what happened." But I knew, as I suspect we all did, that some experiences resist rational explanation. The creatures in those woods existed in a category beyond our comfortable understanding of the natural world, not supernatural perhaps, but certainly not normal. And I knew with cold certainty that they remained there still, controlling their territory, hunting with intelligence that no wild animal should possess, waiting for the next humans foolish enough to venture into their domain. The drive home passed in a blur of fatigue and lingering adrenaline. Every dark shape along the highway made my heart rate spike, though rational thought insisted the creatures couldn't have followed us this far. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had overwhelmed fear, and I collapsed into bed fully clothed. Dreams came immediately, vivid and disturbing, running through endless woods, pursued by shadows that moved with terrible purpose. In the dream, I could hear their communication, not in growls but in something more complex, almost linguistic in its patterns. I woke gasping, sheets twisted around me, the afternoon sun streaming through blinds I'd forgotten to close. Over the next few days, our group maintained constant contact through texts and calls, sharing nightmares, comparing details we remembered, searching for explanations that might restore our sense of a rational world. Cameron found news reports from previous yearshikers gone missing in those same woods, bodies never recovered despite extensive searches. Adam researched wolf behaviors and concluded nothing matched what we'd encountered. Leanne spoke with a biology professor at her university who suggested some form of canine gigantism combined with unusual pack dynamics, but even she admitted the explanation felt inadequate. Sam's scratch became infected despite proper care, requiring antibiotics and leaving a scar that she showed me via video call, 3 parallel lines that the doctor had attributed to a branch but that we both knew came from something else entirely. A week after Halloween, I received a call from Francis, my cousin's husband. "Hey, thanks for cleaning up so well," he began casually. "Lance might head up there next weekend if you want to join him." My throat constricted at the thought. "I think I'll pass this time." "Everything okay? You sound strange." I hesitated, unsure how much to share. "Francis, has Lance ever mentioned seeing anything unusual in those woods? Any weird animals?" A pause, too long to be meaningless. "Why do you ask?" "We saw something while we were there. Several somethings, actually. Large predators moving in coordinated patterns." Another silence. Then, "Lance doesn't go into those woods after dark. Never has. Says it doesn't feel right." "And you never asked why?" "Some things are better left unquestioned," Francis replied, his tone suddenly serious. "The cabin's been in his family for generations. His grandfather used to say the forest had its own guardians, neither good nor evil, just territorial." "You knew," I said, realization dawning. "You knew something was out there." "I knew there were stories," he corrected. "Old hunting tales, local legends, nothing concrete." "Why didn't you warn us? Would you have believed me? By the way, don't go in the woods at night because there might be monsters." He sighed. "Besides, they don't bother you if you don't bother them. Stay near the cabin, respect the boundaries." "We didn't know there were boundaries to respect," I replied, anger rising. "Sam could have been killed." "I'm sorry," Francis said, sounding genuinely remorseful. "Most people visit, enjoy the scenery from the porch, maybe hike the marked trails during daylight. They never encounter anything unusual." "What are they?" I asked directly. "I don't know. Nobody does. The local indigenous tribes had names for them, stories passed down through generations. The early European settlers reported encounters too, usually fatal ones. Modern science has no classification for them. But they exist, I insisted. We all saw them. Yes, Francis conceded. They exist, and they've claimed that territory as their own for far longer than humans have been building cabins there. After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence, processing this confirmation of our experience. Part of me had still hoped for a rational explanation: stress, group hysteria, ordinary animals misidentified in darkness and fear. Francis had eliminated those comfortable possibilities. That evening, our group gathered on a video call. I shared what I'd learned, watching their expressions shift from vindication to renewed unease. The knowledge that others before us had encountered these creatures, that their existence was known, even if only through folklore, somehow made the experience more rather than less disturbing. "So what do we do with this information?" Cameron asked eventually. "Nothing," Adam replied. "What can we do? Report that we confirm some local legend about forest predators? We'd sound insane." "They're dangerous," Sam insisted. "People should know." "People already know," I said. "At least the locals do. It's why the area has so few permanent residents despite the beautiful landscape. It's why the hiking trails don't extend deep into those woods. They've adapted, created an unspoken boundary. And we crossed it," Leanne concluded quietly. The conversation continued late into the night, but we reached no satisfying resolution. Some experiences defy neat conclusions, leaving only questions and the lingering awareness that the world is larger, stranger, and more dangerous than we prefer to believe. In the months that followed, I researched obsessively folklore about forest guardians, scientific papers on undiscovered species, even conspiracy theories about government breeding programs. Nothing provided definitive answers, but patterns emerged across disparate sources: intelligent predators that walk the line between wolf and something else, territorial rather than unnecessarily aggressive, possessing communication abilities beyond normal animal capacity. I never returned to the cabin. Lance sold the property the following summer, saying only that it was time to let it go. I didn't ask if his decision related to what we had encountered. Some questions are better left unasked when you fear the answer. Sometimes, particularly on nights when the moon is full and bright, I dream of those woods again. In the dreams, I understand more than I did while awake that the creatures were neither supernatural nor entirely natural, but something that evolved alongside humans while remaining separate. Intelligent enough to avoid documentation, powerful enough to defend their diminishing territory against encroachment. And I wonder, as civilization continues to expand into the last wild places, how many other boundaries we cross unknowingly, how many other guardians watch from the shadows, waiting to defend what remains of their domain. I don't share these thoughts with others anymore. The Halloween of 2020 has become our secret 5 people who glimpse something beyond ordinary experience, who carry the knowledge that not all predators have been cataloged, not all territories appear on maps. The forest keeps its secrets. And sometimes, if we're fortunate, it allows those who glimpse those secrets to retreat with their lives, carrying nothing but questions that will never find satisfying answers and memories that blur, with time, into something that might almost have been a dream. Almost. This is an encounter I experienced back in the winter of 2013. My parents had just purchased a secluded cabin in the eastern Appalachian Mountains, seeking solitude after decades of urban life. The property sprawled across 7 acres of densely wooded terrain, with a winding gravel driveway that stretched nearly a mile from what locals generously called the main road. Our nearest neighbor lived approximately 2 miles away as a crow would fly, but almost 5 miles by the actual mountain roads. The cabin itself was a sturdy 2-story structure perched on the northern slope of the mountain, with large windows designed to capture the breathtaking valley views. During daylight hours, the panorama was indeed magnificent. As night fell, however, those same windows transformed into black mirrors reflecting only the interior lights, while the surrounding forest disappeared into absolute darkness. My parents had begun the arduous process of relocating from their suburban home. They planned to make several trips to transport their belongings rather than hiring professional movers, partly to save money and partly because the remote location made larger moving trucks impractical on the narrow mountain roads. By mid-January, they had completed about half the move. My father needed to return to the city to finalize some paperwork with his former employer and collect the remaining essentials they'd need for the winter months. My mother had intended to accompany him, but I volunteered to stay at the cabin instead. I was 28 then, between jobs, and thought the solitude might help me reflect on my next career move. "Call us if anything comes up," my father said as he prepared to leave. "Cell reception is spotty, but the landline should work fine. I'll be back tomorrow evening," my mother added, embracing me before following my father to their truck. "There's plenty of food in the freezer. Just be careful with the generator if the power goes out." I waved from the porch as their headlights disappeared down the winding driveway, watching until the rumble of their engine faded into silence. That was when the true weight of the isolation first settled over me. The wind whispered through the bare tree branches, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called into the gathering dusk. I stepped back inside, securing the deadbolt with an instinctive twist. The evening passed uneventfully. I heated a frozen lasagna, browsed through some old magazines my parents had brought, and eventually settled on the living room couch with my laptop to watch a downloaded movie since the internet connection hadn't yet been established. The cabin's heating system functioned efficiently, but I still maintained a fire in the wood stove more for the comforting ambiance than actual warmth. By 11 o'clock, exhaustion began to overwhelm me. The physical labor of helping my parents move boxes earlier that day, combined with the mountain elevation, left me ready for sleep. I secured the fire screen in front of the dying embers, checked that all doors were locked, and retreated to the first-floor guest bedroom where I'd temporarily set up residence. The room felt particularly peaceful. Moonlight filtered through thin curtains, casting silvery patterns across the simple furnishings. I changed into flannel pajamas, grateful for their warmth, and slipped beneath the heavy quilts. The unfamiliar creaks and settling noises of the cabin briefly kept me alert, but soon my consciousness began to drift. The first knock jolted me from deep sleep. My eyes snapped open as I struggled to orient myself in the unfamiliar darkness. The bedside clock glowed 1:17 a.m. in harsh red digits. I remained motionless, ears straining, wondering if I'd dreamed the sound. Then it came again, 3 distinct knocks against the front door's glass panel, deliberate, forceful, unmistakable. My mind raced through possibilities. My parents returning unexpectedly, a neighbor with an emergency, but I hadn't heard a car approach, and visitors would surely call ahead given our remote location. The driveway's loose gravel announced vehicles well before they reached the house, and I'd heard nothing. The third series of knocks exceeded the previous in intensity, as though an impatient fist was demanding entry. The sound echoed through the cabin with alarming clarity. I sat upright, heart hammering against my ribs as fear crystallized into certainty. Someone was at the door, and they shouldn't be. I reached for my phone but found no signal. The mountainous terrain blocked reception in my bedroom. The landline sat in the kitchen, requiring me to cross the main living area with its wall of windows facing the front porch. The thought of moving into visibility made my throat constrict with terror. Silence followed the third knock. I waited, lungs burning from held breath, listening for footsteps on the wooden porch, for the metallic sound of someone testing the doorknob. Nothing came except the house's ordinary nighttime sounds, the refrigerator's hum, the occasional crack from the cooling wood stove. 5 minutes passed according to the glowing bedside clock, then 10. My rational mind began suggesting explanations. A falling branch, an animal, the house settling and changing temperatures. Yet none could account for the deliberate, rhythmic quality of those knocks. I finally gathered enough courage to slide from beneath the covers. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight as I moved to the bedroom door, easing it open just enough to peer down the hallway toward the living room. Moonlight spilled through the front door's glass panels, illuminating a portion of the entryway. No shadows moved across the silvery light. No figure stood visible against the glass. With trembling fingers, I reached for the baseball bat my father had left propped in the corner, a precaution he'd insisted upon that now seemed desperately inadequate. I crept forward, each step carefully placed to minimize noise. The living room gradually came into view, empty, ordinary, bathed in the blue-white glow of moonlight on snow. I approached the front door, bat gripped tightly, and positioned myself to the side of the glass panels where I could glimpse the porch without being immediately visible. The wooden boards stretched empty in both directions. Fresh snow covered the steps leading down to the driveway, unmarked by footprints. This detail sent a wave of dread through me more intense than the knocking itself. The pristine snow meant whoever or whatever had knocked hadn't approached by conventional means. The only explanation was that someone had traveled through the dense forest, avoiding the driveway entirely, navigating steep terrain in darkness to reach our isolated cabin. I remained vigilant until dawn, positioned in the hallway where I could monitor both the front door and the rear entrance off the kitchen. The baseball bat rested across my knees as I sat with my back against the wall, listening to every creak and groan of the cabin. The knocking never resumed, nor did any other sounds suggest the visitor remained. When the first gray light of morning finally appeared, I performed a careful inspection of the property. The snow around the cabin remained undisturbed except for animal tracks, deer and rabbits primarily. No human footprints marked the approaches to the doors or windows. Nothing appeared disturbed or damaged. Later that afternoon, when my parents returned, I recounted the experience. My father immediately checked the property again, this time venturing further into the woods than I had dared alone. He discovered nothing unusual except for a strange arrangement of broken branches about 50 yards into the forest that he insisted must have been caused by recent heavy snowfall. We installed motion-activated security cameras the following week. For months, I found myself startled awake at night, certain I'd heard knocking again, only to review empty footage the next morning. We never captured anything unusual on the cameras, yet during my subsequent visits to the cabin, I never again stayed there alone. What troubles me most isn't the absence of an explanation, but rather what might have happened had I answered the door. In my darkest moments, I'm grateful for the fear that kept me in bed, listening to those knocks gradually fade into the mountain's vast silence. Some visitors, I've come to believe, aren't meant to be received. Years have passed since that night. My parents still live in that cabin, having never experienced anything similar. Yet whenever I visit, I find myself listening more carefully after darkness falls, and I always check the locks twice before retiring to bed. The mountains keep their secrets well, and some questions are better left unanswered.